The door of the plane is already open when the wind finds you first. Below, the fields of Normandy are black and silver under a quarter moon, and a boy no older than you is already falling away into the dark, his shoot a pale flower, blooming too far to help. You are 19 years old when the green light snaps on over the jump door of your C-47. Until then, you were a grocer's son from a street in Ohio where the loudest thing that ever happened was a 4th of July parade. In the next 6 hours, you will help hold a single stone bridge against a German counterattack, and men who trust you with their lives will still be breathing at dawn because of a decision you have not made yet. What you stand to lose is not vague. It is your sergeant's trust, it is the bridge itself, and it is the silver rosary your mother pressed into your palm at the train station in Columbus. The Germans have orders to retake the bridge at Saint-Mère-Église before first light, and first light is 4 hours away. Your name is Danny Kowalski, and until 3 weeks ago, the closest you had come to France was a photograph in a school book. Your father, Stan, ran the grocery on Willow Street, flour dust always in the creases of his hands. Your mother, Helen, kept the register and sang while she worked, off-key and unashamed. Your younger sister, Josephine, is 15, and she believes with total confidence that you will come home a hero, an idea you have never had the heart to correct. Your best friend since grade school, Tommy Vance, enlisted the same week you did, and he has never once in his life said a serious sentence without ruining it with a joke 30 seconds later. Before you shipped out, there was Margaret, who works the switchboard at the exchange downtown, and who has a habit of tucking a stray curl behind her ear whenever she is thinking hard about what to say next. She gave you the rosary through your mother's hands because she could not bring herself to say goodbye at the station in front of everyone. The rosary is wrapped twice around your left wrist under your jump gear, the small silver beads cold even through the fabric. It was the last thing Margaret touched before it touched you. Before Normandy, there was Fort Benning, and there was Sergeant Ray Doyle, 34 years old, a mechanic from Pittsburgh in peacetime, a man with a voice like gravel, poured slowly. He told your stick something on the first day of training that none of you understood yet. He said the man beside you is the mission, not the objective, not the map, the man beside you. You laughed about it in the barracks that night. You are not laughing about it now, 20 minutes from the drop zone, with Tommy's knee bouncing against yours in the dark fuselage. The plane bucks hard and someone near the tail is sick into his own helmet. Flak bursts outside the windows in dull orange flowers, and the crew chief starts shouting numbers you cannot follow over the engine noise. Your stick is scattered before you even jump, the formation broken apart by the anti-aircraft fire, planes peeling off in every direction to survive. When the light turns green, there is no time left to be afraid in any organized way. You go through the door into black air, and the world becomes wind and silence and the distant orange blooms of fire below you, and somewhere in that silence you understand for the first time that you have no idea where the rest of your stick has landed. You come down hard in an orchard, not a drop zone, wrenching your ankle on a route you never saw. The countryside is quiet in the way that only means the quiet cannot last. Church bells somewhere are ringing an alarm that has nothing to do with time. You cut yourself free of your chute with a knife your father gave you at the station, the same knife he used 40 years to open flour sacks, and you leave it hanging in the apple tree because there is no time to bury silk. You are alone in a field in France, 4 hours before dawn, and the bridge you were briefed on 100 times is somewhere to your east, and you start walking toward the sound of gunfire because that is where the men will be. You find 6 of them by the third hedgerow, Tommy among them, grinning even now with blood on his collar that is not his own. Sergeant Doyle is not with this group. Nobody has seen him since the drop. A corporal named Reyes tells you what the whole stick already half suspects, that this is not the fight they briefed, that the drop scattered half the battalion across 10 miles of hedgerow and marsh, and that the bridge at Saint-Mère-Église, the one objective that actually matters tonight, has maybe a dozen Americans holding it against whatever the Germans send next. You reach the bridge an hour before a first light. It is smaller than the maps made it look, a stone hump over a slow brown river, already scarred by rifle fire on both parapets. 12 men are dug into the hedges on the near bank, and one of them, filthy and limping, is Sergeant Doyle. He does not waste time on relief at seeing you. He puts you on the north end of the line and tells you the Germans will come up the road from Caen with at least one armored vehicle, and that this bridge does not get to fall. Not today. Not for any reason anyone will accept afterward. The bridge sits between 2 low hedgerows, and Sergeant Doyle spreads the 12 of you along a shallow ditch on the near bank, close enough to the water that you can hear it moving under the gunfire. He puts Tommy on the south end with the only bazooka anyone has managed to keep dry. He puts you in the middle, beside a farm boy from Georgia named Odom, who has not stopped shaking since the jump and who keeps checking his rifle bolt, as though it might have changed since the last time he looked. Doyle crouches beside you both for a moment. He says the same thing he said at Fort Benning, the man beside you is the mission, and this time, nobody laughs. The Germans come at 10 minutes past 5, not with tanks, but with a single armored car and 30 infantry moving fast along the road from Caen, exactly where Doyle said they would. The first exchange is loud and short and terrifying, muzzle flashes stitching the hedgerow, and Odom fires wild until you press his shoulder down and tell him to breathe, to aim low, to trust the sights. The armored car takes a bazooka round from Tommy's end of the line and stops dead in the road, smoke pouring from its hatch, and for a moment the German advance falters. Then a second wave comes, and this one has a machine gun crew that sets up in a stone barn 100 yards off, and the bridge becomes a place where standing up means dying. By the time the sky turns gray, 3 of the 12 are wounded, 1 badly. Doyle takes a graze along his forearm and does not stop directing fire long enough to notice it bleeding through his sleeve. The ticking clock Doyle named at dawn was simple. Hold until the seaborne troops push inland from the beaches and relieve the bridge, and nobody in this ditch knows how many hours that actually is. The signature object on your wrist, Margaret's rosary, has come loose from its wrapping somewhere in the crawling and the diving, and you feel for it twice in the lull between attacks, twice finding it still there, twice breathing out. Reyes brings word from a runner sent up from the south end. A company of Germans is moving to flank the position through the orchard where you landed hours earlier, the same orchard where your father's knife still hangs in a tree. If they take that ground, the bridge falls from behind, and every man on it dies or is captured by noon. Doyle has 11 able-bodied men and 1 flank he cannot both defend and hold the bridge with. He needs 3 of you to peel off and delay the flanking company in the orchard, knowing that 3 men against 40 is not a fight anyone survives cleanly, only a fight that buys time for the others. He does not order it, he asks for volunteers, and in the silence that follows, Odom will not meet anyone's eyes, and Tommy, still grinning even now, says he will go, because someone always has to, and it might as well be the one who already knows the orchard. Doyle looks at you last, and you understand, without him saying it, that this is the moment he has been building toward since Fort Benning. The man beside you is the mission, and the mission right now needs bodies in that orchard, and Tommy's already moving toward it, and you have to decide in the space of 1 breath whether you go with him and abandon your position on the bridge, or hold the line and let your best friend walk into the orchard with only 2 other men beside him. You go. There is no version of this where you let Tommy walk into that orchard without you. Not after 15 years of him being the one constant thing in your life that never asked anything of you and never once let you down. But going means the bridgeline loses a rifle at the exact hour it can least afford to, and Doyle knows it, and he lets you go anyway because he trained you to protect the man beside you, and now he has to live inside the cost of his own lesson. The cost is named twice more before the sun clears the trees. The first cost is Odom, alone now on the section of ditch you left, hit in the shoulder by machine gun fire 20 minutes after you crossed the hedge into the orchard, a wound that would not have happened, might not have happened if the line had held its full strength. The second cost waits in the orchard itself. 3 of you against a flanking company is not a fair fight and was never meant to be one. It is meant to cost time, not lives, but the ground does not know the difference between a delaying action and a last stand. The apple trees you landed among 6 hours ago become a maze of cover and crossfire, and the German company, expecting an empty flank, walks into 3 rifles firing from angles they cannot immediately place, and for 11 minutes the confusion buys exactly what Doyle needed. It is in the 8th of those 11 minutes that Tommy is hit, twice, moving between trees to cover the 3rd man's retreat toward the ditch, and he goes down beside the same apple tree where your father's knife still hangs from a strap of parachute silk. You reach him before the Germans reach either of you, and there is a version of Sergeant Doyle's rule that you understand now in a way Fort Benning never taught. The man beside you is the mission, and sometimes the mission is simply staying beside him until the end of it, whatever the end turns out to be. Tommy does not die there in the orchard. He is alive when you drag him back through the hedge, but he is alive in the way that means stretcher bearers, and a field hospital, and a war that is over for him, before noon on the longest day of his life. The rosary comes loose again in the dragging, and this time you do not have a free hand to check for it. The flanking company, delayed and disorganized, is caught in the open by a relief column pushing up from the beach road just after 8 in the morning, American armor finally arriving, 4 hours later than the plan promised, but not 1 minute too late for the bridge itself. The bridge at Saint-Mère-Église does not fall. Sergeant Doyle's line holds until the relief arrives. 11 men, instead of 12, standing when the tanks roll up. Odom pale and bandaged but alive, Reyes unhurt. The German attack broken against stone and river and men who would not move. Doyle finds you in the aftermath, sitting against the same hedgerow you crawled into 8 hours earlier, and he does not say anything about rules or lessons. He looks at the blood on your hands that is Tommy's and not your own, and he says only that the bridge held, and that some costs are worth what they buy, and that he is sorry it was this one. You look for the rosary in the churned mud of the orchard before you leave it for good, and you do not find it. What you find instead, half buried near the base of the apple tree, is your father's knife, still hanging where you left it in the dark hours before dawn, untouched by 6 hours of war that passed within 20 feet of it. Tommy survives the field hospital and survives the ship home, and by the time you see him again, it is in a photograph his mother sends to your mother's grocery on Willow Street. Tommy on crutches on his own front porch in Ohio, still grinning, the same grin that walked into the orchard beside you. You carry that photograph in the same pocket where the rosary used to sit, because a man learns to keep something close even after the thing he first carried there is gone. The bridge stands for the rest of the war and for decades after, and it is never taken from the men who held it that morning. Sergeant Doyle is wounded twice more before Germany surrenders, and neither wound keeps him from finishing what Fort Benning started in him years before he ever said a word to you about the man beside you being the mission. Odom writes you exactly one letter in October, misspelling half the words, thanking you for the thing in the ditch you barely remember doing. Reyes you never hear from again, one of 1,000 names that passed through a war, and out the other side of it without a forwarding address. You go home in the autumn of 1945, back to Willow Street, back to your father's flower dust, and your mother's off-key singing, back to Josephine, 17 now and no longer quite so certain what a hero is supposed to look like up close. Margaret is still at the switchboard downtown, and she still tucks the same stray curl behind her ear when she is thinking hard about what to say and what she says. The first time she sees you standing in the doorway of the exchange in your uncreased civilian clothes is not about the war at all. She asks what happened to the rosary, and you tell her the truth, that you lost it in an orchard in France on the longest day of your life, trying to keep the man beside you alive, and that some things you carry are not made of silver. The knife still sits in a drawer in your father's grocery, unopened flour sacks waiting beside it, the same knife that hung untouched in an apple tree while a war passed through the branches around it and left it standing. You still think of the orchard on quiet mornings, 60 years gone, the light exactly the same color as it was at dawn.